All right. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the fourth episode of Tate's Takes. Me and Alex both have had a lot going on this weekend, but we're going to try to do a quick little podcast today. So we thank everyone for listening always. Like I said, fourth episode. We're feeling good about it moving forward. And we're 2 weeks in now to the NFL season. This is right before week 3 starts. Actually, well, after the Thursday night game the Niners are pretty good. We're not going to do a lot of Niners. So I'll just touch on them briefly. They don't ask Brock Purdy to do a ton, and they don't need to, and they look really good. And the Giants look like they overpaid for a mediocre quarterback. But Alex, so far, what is your biggest takeaway from these first 2 weeks in the NFL?
So biggest takeaways aside from the 49ers are good, and we have been proven correct that Daniel Jones is pretty bad.
We were both skeptics. I was
Um,
excited the day they signed Daniel Jones to that contract because I was like, oh, Dak isn't the most overpaid quarterback in the division anymore. It's like now the Giants have that problem. So this worked out pretty well.
yeah, no, the my biggest takeaway is that you know the Colts have something going. I gotta say, the
I agree.
Colts are looking like a pretty solid football team, and we're going to get to a little bit later on. Once they get Jonathan Taylor back, if he's not traded or if he's not, there's no finicky business. I think they might make a good run at the Jacksonville Jaguars because Trevor Lawrence, he's been pretty good, but he hasn't looked quite as great, and so that division is pretty wide open. And I really think that with the quasi implosion that's happening in the AFC North, we might end up seeing two teams go from the AFC South, which nobody would have expected
Yeah.
for this year playoffs. But yeah, I gotta say, they gotta protect a little bit better. Their QB's already down, and we've started to see some of that throughout the league where these very young rookies who might other people might consider have been a little bit undersized. You got to really invest in an offensive line for these guys to help them develop, and I think that's one place that the Colts really need some help. Might start looking in, but it's so hard to get offensive line guys off before a trade deadline. But yeah, I've been really, really impressed with what they've been doing.
Yeah.
What are you?
And to your point, and I don't want to give too much of my first takeaway away right now, but Anthony Richardson was supposedly going to be the raw rookie quarterback who came in. I'm not sure, he hasn't looked the best among the rookie quarterbacks. Now, like you said, he's obviously going to miss today with a concussion, but he is such a physical specimen. And in the AFC, I totally understand the thought process of drafting a guy like Anthony Richardson over a CJ Stroud or something like that, because the upside is there with him. And I didn't even expect to play almost this year. And speaking of, they have a good backup, Gardner Minshew, who I think is more than capable and very competent. And Gardner Minshew is one of these weird guys who might be a low-level starter in the NFL, but I don't know if he's ever really going to get that shot again. He might, and there's guys that do sometimes, Tannehill and stuff like that. He's at least as good as Tannehill probably at this point. But they were prepared to play multiple quarterbacks throughout the year. And I think they will be able to survive the Anthony Richardson ups and downs, even if he gets hurt again, because they have a capable backup. The offense is going to look a little different with Gardner Minshew, but I'm not sure that doesn't play to their advantage today against the Ravens, because the tape they've put out there so far is going to be a lot different than the offense they're going to be playing today, and yeah, but Anthony Richardson, if I had to redraft and take a rookie quarterback, he would probably be the guy that I would take. And I don't think anybody was expecting that through 2 weeks. So I totally agree. I think the Colts have a shot at making the playoffs. I'm not going to say that they will, because I think it's a long season, and I think Anthony Richardson is going to make some mistakes and going to look like a rookie at times. I don't know that they're going to be able to make the playoffs in a loaded AFC. I still think Jacksonville is the heavy favorite to win that division. I know they lost to Kansas City, and people I think are overreacting slightly to the Jacksonville Kansas City game because Kansas City has a very, very good defense at worst, if not a great defense. And the fact that Jacksonville wasn't able to score a touchdown, they're supposed to be an offensive team. I think people are slightly overreacting to that. But that's not to say Jacksonville doesn't look like a juggernaut either. You know, Trevor Lawrence, you kind of pointed this out, doesn't look like the MVP I thought he was going to be through 2 weeks. You know, we'll see if he can pick it up. They have a pretty easy matchup today against the Texans. But yeah, I think the Colts, even though their owner is a little bit of a nut job, and I don't like how they're handling the Jonathan Taylor situation, absolutely have some pieces. And I think they made the right pick with their first pick in the draft this year with Anthony Richardson. So I agree.
Yeah. What about you? What's your biggest takeaway this so far?
So another rookie quarterback, my biggest takeaway, and is not a team a lot of people are talking about, but Bryce Young already being hurt, I think is a really, really bad sign for Carolina. Because remember, they traded away DJ Moore, multiple draft picks to go get Bryce Young. And if you look at these college quarterbacks this year, I was watching some of the Caleb Williams last night. Bo Nix looked great for Oregon. The kid for Washington, Penix, looks really good. Even Shador Sanders. I'm not sure Bryce Young would be a top 3 quarterback taken in this year's upcoming draft. So I think we're going to look back on that Carolina move to trade away those picks, trade away DJ Moore, go get Bryce Young as a really impatient move by the ownership. And you kind of respect a team that wants to win now and wants to not just tank another year, almost like the Cardinals this year are trying to lose games. You know, they're not, you can't actively say that, but they're obviously trading away their pieces. They're trying to put a bad team on the field. You know, they were up huge on the Giants, and, you know, Alex claims that they remember they were trying to tank the season at halftime and came out and lost it, you know, in the second half. It's hard to kind of argue that is the way things were looking in the first half. But so you kind of respect Carolina for not wanting to wait, but I think it was just I'm not saying you shouldn't have drafted a quarterback, but you shouldn't have traded the picks knowing who was coming out the following year, you know? And I think that that's maybe my biggest takeaway so far. And when you have early confirmation that the biggest critique of a player is coming true, that is very, very worrisome at a professional level to me. And Bryce Young, the biggest takeaway, you know, the biggest critique of him entering the draft was, oh, he's got great instincts. You know, he throws a good ball for a guy his size, but is he going to be able to stay healthy for a season, for a career, or is he going to be a smaller version of Tua who struggles with that? And we've talked extensively about that on this podcast. And it looks like he's going to have a heck of a hard time staying healthy. And he just looks small out there. You know, like he really just looks like an undersized player, even more so than Tua, you know. And I think, like I said, I think we're going to look back, and I think that's going to end up being a pretty decent mistake by Carolina, where if you just wait one more year, I think you get a true franchise guy. I think there's going to be a lot of opportunities in this coming draft to get a franchise quarterback. And it's never quite as good as we think, but you know, I just think that was a big gamble to trade that many picks for a guy who has a blatant flaw, and it's not something that neither me or you condoned at the time, and it's not something that's looking good moving forward already, you know. So
Yeah,
that's
just to that point, I think that one of the hardest things to for GMs to figure out is how do you tank but still have pieces. And whenever you get a rookie quarterback that you're expecting to play day one,
right.
and like we'll take the bumps and bruises that come along with it, we'll take the ups and downs, but we still have to have things around you to make you as successful as you possibly can be.
Right.
Whenever you're talking about the Colts, right? They were pretty successful. They have some weapons, and they have decent-ish protection.
I like Michael Pittman. Jonathan Taylor is obviously elite if he comes back, you know.
And you get rid of DJ Moore, who's like an obvious star wide receiver in this league.
Right.
And who's Bryce Young supposed to throw to? Like, who's supposed to be his safety valve at
Right.
that? And so I think that you G
Not only did you invest a lot into the pick, but you traded away some key pieces that would have helped him a lot. And that's not to mention they had Christian McCaffrey on the roster at the beginning of last season, and he's been one of the best non-quarterbacks in the whole league, one of the most impactful non-quarterbacks in the NFL today. So you traded away some pieces that would have really helped a rookie quarterback. It's like a run game certainly helps a rookie. A star wide receiver we see all over the NFL definitely helps the progression of a young quarterback, and they are not setting the kid up for success. Their offensive line doesn't protect particularly well. And when you have a guy like that, I think you need weapons. I think you need offensive line. I think if you dropped Bryce Young on the Dolphins, he'd probably look pretty good. I think he would be able to run that Mike McDaniel system. I think he's smart enough. I think he throws an accurate enough ball. I think he would look very good on the Dolphins, in some of these systems that the coaches set up for quarterbacks who have a specific set of skills, I think could benefit Bryce Young. And I don't think that's what they did in Carolina so far.
I think I totally agree with that. I think that, yeah, he's just a little bit set up to fail, and you don't get rid of all of your picks just to
Right.
do it all. You know what I mean? So you
Especially
respect.
when the guys coming up this next year are big and it's like athletic. It's like you just have some real talents coming out, man. Like I watched a little bit of the Oregon Colorado game, and Shador, obviously the Colorado got their ass kicked. It's like one a particularly close game, but I hadn't seen Bo Nix play in a minute. He's a real player. I mean, he's going to be an NFL guy. He looks like a potential franchise quarterback to me, and he's not even talked about being a top 2 pick this year. So it's like really there's some guys coming out that you just wait one more year. I think there's going to be 5 or 6 teams that feel like they get their guy in this draft. And I think Carolina maybe jumped the gun on it.
And one thing that I think is important to realize is you don't have to go full tank this year to get
Right.
a quality quarterback next year.
Right.
Like that's the Cardinals are going full tank, but I think what they're doing is actually pretty smart, where they're demonstrating, hey, we have almost nothing on our team. We
Right.
can play these pretty good teams pretty close with nothing. And it
Right.
just, they're kind of coaching and the leadership that they're building there to say, no, we really are going to commit to making as good of a team around a quarterback as we possibly can
Right.
for not a ton of money, because they're trying to figure out what they're even going to do with Kyler Murray's contract, with just solid coaching that can keep us in games that technically they probably should have won their first 2.
Yeah.
But again, they just
They're
remember.
in it. Yeah. And let's just be clear here. There's only one Caleb Williams in the draft. So I totally understand the decision to go full tank because there's only one Caleb Williams. But there is some other guys who I think would have been the first pick in this past draft, and I will say that, So yeah, I think that's going to end up being a decent mistake. My second biggest takeaway is, man, the Browns made a mistake getting Deshaun Watson. And I know Alex is going to like this topic, but okay, take the contracts out of it so far. Okay. Who would you rather have in a vacuum right now, Deshaun Watson or Baker Mayfield? Because Baker certainly has played better this year. Now, I understand the upside of Deshaun. Some people would still take him, but that's not including the contract. Baker is one of the cheapest quarterbacks in the league right now. Deshaun, the most expensive. So when you take into the contracts, you would absolutely rather have Baker right now than Deshaun. And the Browns traded a multitude of draft picks and immediately gave him the most guaranteed money in the history of the NFL. And I think it's just such a Browns move to make, man. They had won one of the previous 35 games, 1 out of 35 before Baker Mayfield got there. His second year, they beat Pittsburgh in a playoff game, who they never, ever beat.
Third year.
Third year, thank you. Yeah. and then they're competitive in a game in Arrowhead against Patrick Mahomes with a chance to go to the conference finals. And, he had a bad year the next year, I think large part because of an injury to his throwing shoulder where he came back too early and probably should have set out some more. I think he tried to come back, and I think they punished him for trying to come back too early by totally jumping ship. And it's just such a Browns thing to do where you have a guy who's playing well, helping the franchise, not going to be one of the highest paid quarterbacks in the league, and a guy that's going to have a contract you can build a team around. And you go and trade for someone with, we'll call it baggage, to say the least, off the field, someone whose character has become into question, someone who's going to miss 18 months of football. And I don't know that the Houston Deshaun is ever going to come back. It certainly doesn't look like it. And last season, when he came back for the, however many games it was, the second half of the year or so, you had the excuse of, okay, he's rusty. He's missed a bunch of time. He hasn't been with the team. He didn't get to practice with the first team most of the year. So it's obviously going to look a little different right now. He has looked worse through 2 weeks this season. And his passing stats are amongst the worst QBs in the league. He's looked okay running the ball, but he doesn't have the same escapability he had when he was in Houston. And I think he is getting frustrated. I think he's put on a brave face in front of the microphones, but I think you saw the 2 face mask penalties from a quarterback last week, which I frankly have never seen before. I didn't really even know a quarterback could get a face mask penalty. I don't know that I ever saw one, and to get 2 in one game, I think it's obvious frustration building on his part. I think the Browns, with the Chubb injury, I think there's going to be some big changes, and he is not a player you can move off from yet, because after this season, you still have $138 million guaranteed dollars to Deshaun. So it's just a problem. And I think if you're a Browns fan, you can't help but be frustrated. And I think, like I said, it's just a Browns move, and bad organizations get a little panicked, and they kind of take big swings, but they're not calculated big swings. The Rams, I think, took a very calculated big swing to bring in Stafford. I think the Bucks less so, like anyone would have loved to have Tom Brady, but there wasn't as much of a market for Brady as people thought there was going to be when he was 43 and going to Tampa, and they won both those teams ended up winning a Super Bowl, and I just think the Browns are in real trouble. And I think this season is going to continue to go, I'm not going to say totally poorly, but I don't think they're a playoff team. I think when you pay someone a contract like Deshaun, you expect to be a playoff team, and you expect them to be able to make up some slack around the rest of the team, which, to be honest, there is not a lot of holes in that Browns roster. And if they're not a playoff team, that's disappointing at best, right? If not a total disaster by some metrics. So that's my second biggest takeaway so far, is the Baker Mayfield revenge tour versus Deshaun. It's like, man, I'd rather have Baker today, especially given the contract situation,
I mean, yes, obviously, all of that, I 100% agree. Like you said, there's not a lot of holes on this Browns roster. Their defense is absolutely incredible, headed up by Myles Garrett.
Yes.
And their receivers are solid. And Amari Cooper, don't know if
technician, yeah.
I don't know if he's a true number one, but he's serviceable as a number one. Njoku is a great tight end. Nick Chubb, like, I hate the Browns, but I love Nick Chubb, so it's pretty devastating for the entire league to watch him go down. But because there's not a lot of holes, that means there's not a lot of excuses for Deshaun to play the way he's been playing. And yeah, he doesn't have, he's putting on a brave face, but like, it's not like he feels that bad if he plays poorly, because he's still getting 200.
That's what the money's for, as they say. That's what the money's for. So
dollar bills, like, it doesn't matter. But I would, to be fair to Browns fans, it is okay to have said Baker's not playing up to the standard that we want, that we feel like we can achieve. So let's move off of him. But I mean, who would you have rather had other than Deshaun Watson at that time? Well, like, you could have made a run to go get Goff from the Lions. You knew Aaron Rodgers wasn't happy in Green Bay. You could have gone after him. Russell Wilson
It hadn't looked great either, but he's at least a better locker room guy probably than Deshaun, and it's not a PR nightmare. It's like
you could go after any number of other people, even if you had tanked last year, did nothing to try to actually get a super high pick and take their it's Dorian Thompson-Robinson, their backup for Deshaun. If you had just taken that guy, you would have had so much more money to go after a star receiver or a second back behind Nick Chubb. You could have been in the running for Jonathan Taylor. You could have maybe even paid Dalvin Cook, whatever, to come over from. You could have put together a crazy roster. And make no mistake, if Watson gets benched at any point, I guarantee you DTR is going to show up better than he is. And you would have saved yourself $235 million in 5 years.
And that's the whole point I was making about both Carolina and the Browns is I'm not saying you shouldn't have drafted a quarterback if you're Carolina, and I'm not saying moving off from Baker after the one season, I probably would have stuck it out one more season, but I'm also a Baker fan. I'm wearing an OU shirt right now, so we're Baker guys, but I understand wanting to move off of Baker. The compensation you gave up to get each of those respective players was frankly too much to give up for them, right? And when the performance isn't, the stakes just become so high when you move off that much draft capital, use the number one pick, or give out that contract. All of a sudden, the pressure's ratcheted up, especially in the case of the Browns. A rookie quarterback going to get some slack anyway. But, when if you're Deshaun, they expect you to come in and be great, and to make them a real contender in the AFC. And that was the expectation. And they look pretty far from that to me. And I know they beat the heck out of the Bengals. Joe Burrow playing on one leg, and they match up really bad against the Browns anyway. So it's like, I don't take it too much away from that game. I think that's a throw away the tape kind of game,
Yeah. And, last thing I'll say about the Browns there is Stefanski has now had 2 quarterbacks where they don't look comfortable in his system.
Yeah.
Like, sometimes Baker was awesome in it, but most of the time, and I remember watching those Browns games and being like, Baker just looks a little panicked. And I was watching the Browns this week. Watson just looked panicked. Like he's just uncomfortable in that situation, and he's not using his athleticism. Colin Cowherd picked this out. He's not using his athleticism to actually go and like extend a play. He's just running because he's getting chased down, and they're supposed to have one of the best lines in football. So you kind of wonder, like, what kind of coaching do they have? And Stefanski was coach of the year his first year as a head coach.
That's right.
His quarterbacks have not looked great since then. His scheming it's not cutting up the secondaries like you want. Like, he can still ground and pound. They're great at run blocking, but he's not getting guys open. He's waiting. He's like taking too much time. And if you watch Justin Fields, who has 5 seconds, he's taking way too much time. And that's the kind of thing that you can see quarterbacks having to like process these crazy route trees that their receivers are running, rather than using leverage, using movement, using anything to open up their receivers. And that's like a big knock on Stefanski. And so with a swing as big as hitting for Deshaun Watson and hoping you go to a Super Bowl, over the next 5 years, which it really, whenever that cap hits, it's really like the first 2 years, maybe a third, that your window's open
Right.
before you're getting rid of people because you can't pay. Um, Stefanski's going to be the one on the chopping block, and it sucks.
Absolutely. That was what I was going to say too. Was I don't know what kind of coach Stefanski is. I think he may be a good coach. I think he may be an okay coach. I don't know that he's a great coach. I do know that he's going to be the next one to go in Cleveland if things don't go well, because it's not going to be Deshaun. And if they go 6-11 this year or 7-10 and miss playoffs, and they're looking for a fall guy, it's going to be Stefanski next. And
Here's
he he may be a good coach, but he's in a tough spot.
the thing about the AFC. They can't even go 9-8 and make the playoffs. The
Yeah.
AFC's stacked. So he has to they have to win pretty handily a few of these gimme games, and also play to like above the level of their more difficult opponents, and they have to win probably 10 or 11 games to, I would say, make a wild card outside,
Yeah,
like
I agree.
a bunch
I,
of other
I
AFC.
think the baseline wins for AFC playoff team is going to be 10. I think you're going to have to get to 10.
Yeah, and I don't see that happening with
There
Nick.
may be a 9-win team in the NFC that makes it, but I don't think that's going to happen in the AFC. I totally agree. And then the only other big takeaway I've had so far, and I think Alex disagrees with this one, and this could be one we could talk for an hour about. Like I said, we'll try to keep it short today, but it looks to me like the defensive head coach has been passed by a little bit in the game. And we look at Bill Belichick, to me, the best coach of all time. I know some people might argue. I don't think there's a great argument against it, but definitely the best defensive mind in the history of the game. I think almost anyone would agree with that. 0-2, they hadn't looked good since Brady left. They haven't really been able to develop another offense. The offensive line hasn't been overly successful. The running game hasn't been overly successful since, the quarterback play. I don't totally put on Belichick, but they haven't really developed Mac Jones. He doesn't look a lot different than he was when he was a rookie. And I think that's a lot on coaching sometimes. The Steelers, Tomlin, I think maybe the second best defensive coach in the NFL. They haven't really developed a running game. Najee Harris is one of the least efficient players despite his talent level in the NFL. The Kenny Pickett doesn't look very good in year two. I expected him to make a pretty decent sized jump this season. That has not come to fruition at all. You keep going through the defense coaches in the NFL. The Chargers, Brandon Staley, they have the most expensive defense that's ranked last in almost everything right now. And I think Staley's definitely on the hot seat, by the way. I think he may be the first coach to get fired this year if they keep going poorly. Like if they lost today, man, he is in real trouble, I think. But and then on the flip side of that, you look at these offensive coaches. We've talked a lot about the Dolphins, but Mike McDaniel is, a tremendous offensive coach. Even the Cowboys and Mike McCarthy, I know the offense has not been what everyone's been talking about, but Dak doesn't have a turnover so far this season. I think that's important, and they hadn't asked him to do too much. I think they played really complimentary football and leaned on the defense and running game. I think he has a pretty good understanding of what the team needs to be successful, and I think the other, you look at the Niners, obviously we talked about with Shanahan. The Rams are definitely overachieving so far. I think these offensive coaches, I don't know how many more defensive coaches are going to keep getting head coaching jobs. And I don't know that that's totally fair, but it's kind of like the running back situation where I kind of get it. And I think if I was running a team, especially if I had a young quarterback, I would not bring in a defense head coach. You look at what's going on with the Bears. They cannot develop Justin Fields. Tomlin cannot develop Kenny Pickett. Robert Saleh, and I'm not saying Zach Wilson was ever going to be great, but he certainly doesn't look any better than he did a couple years ago. I think so. I think the NFL is really changing, leaning towards offense, and I think we're going to see sort of the phasing out of these great defensive head coaches as the game continues to become more offensive. The weapons are by far more important than they've ever been right now. The quarterback play keeps elevating and elevating. And I think, like I said, especially with a young quarterback, I think you need an offensive guy in there running the helm. And the problem too with the defensive coaches are, and let's look at Buffalo as a perfect example of this. If you have a defense head coach and they have a great offense coordinator, the offense coordinator is going to leave. And then, you look at what's going on with the Bills. It's like, yeah, they had a great setup where McDermott and Daboll, they had the defensive head coach, the great offense coordinator, and things were looking really good. And then the offense coordinator gets head coach a job. And now I'd rather have Daboll as my head coach than McDermott. You know what I mean? So,
Yeah, I think I think that you're probably right, but I would hesitate. I would say that you can't be just a good defensive you can't go from being a good defensive coordinator to a good defensive head coach. Like it's way more forgiving for the offense,
sure.
right? Because your whole thing is, well, let's get down to the fundamentals of what football is. The fundamentals are with the most points at the end wins the game.
Correct.
And your gut instinct is, I'm going to design something that gets me more points versus I'm going to stop somebody from getting more points to me. That mindset changes how you actually coach. And so I think that if you are lights out, one of the best defensive coordinators by far, you could probably make a pretty decent head coach. But you're right. You'd have to have a great offensive coordinator. So you'd have to be.
The other thing I will say about a defensive head coach is you almost have to have a veteran quarterback now, in my opinion. Like if you're going to draft a rookie quarterback, I think you almost have to have an offense head coach. And, Shane Steichen is the Colts head coach now. He was the offensive coordinator when Jalen Hurts made his big jumps in Philly. And we talked about Anthony Richardson looking a lot better than anybody thought through the first 2 weeks. And I think, having an offense head coach really plays a big part in that. I think they have a really bright guy, kind of running the helm. Like I said, I think the quarterback's benefited from that. And I think when you have a veteran quarterback who kind of almost runs his own show on offense, I think you can probably get away with a lot more of a defensive minded head coach. But when you have these young quarterbacks coming in, I think they need that guidance. They need that relationship with the head coach to be successful. And one of the perfect litmus tests for that was Tua looked like a bust when they had Flowers as the head coach, who's a great defensive coach. And I thought really was going to be a good head coach, or Brian Flores, sorry. And then, they bring in McDaniel, and Tua might literally win the MVP, and the Dolphins look like a Super Bowl team. And they weren't terrible, before McDaniel got there, but it doesn't look the same either, and like no one would say that. So
Yeah, I think that you're right. You have to have a veteran quarterback. You have to have a great offensive coordinator below you, but you also have to look at how the game's developed, right? So with Patrick Mahomes like making a splash, and that other teams can run these 2-minute drills, minute and a half, no timeouts, whatever, anything, and put up 7 points on you. Your priority, especially if you have a young quarterback, especially if you're looking to build an identity within a locker room, your priority has to be, we're going to go and get points. And so I think since that's the way the league is moving overall, I think that's why we're seeing
really the way the rules are changing too and everything like that. So yeah, so those are my 3 biggest takeaways so far, is I think we had a couple mistakes from a quarterback position. I think we're going to keep seeing the league become more offensive. And I think the defensive head coaches are going to get fewer opportunities, kind of less and less slack as we move forward, and I think that's kind of how it's going to have to be for a little bit. It may correct itself at some point, but for the time being, especially with those young quarterbacks. So,
yeah. Well, what are your upsets?
Okay. I have one upset pick Here's my main upset pick today. I got the Commanders beating the Bills in Washington. And here's why. The Commanders have an elite pass rush. Josh Allen has looked great against the Raiders, but he still made some questionable decisions even in a 38-10 win. And I think if they can get pressure on him, I think they can force him into some mistakes. I think since he played so well last week, he's one of these up and down quarterbacks. I think he may be prone to having a kind of a mistake riddled game today. And I think Sam Howell is a gamer at quarterback. I think they may have found not a hidden superstar, but someone who's a competent franchise level guy at quarterback. I think Bieniemy has really helped him take care of the ball and get these weapons involved early and often in that offense. And I think the Bills are the kind of team that doesn't handle adversity particularly well, where if they have a couple turnovers early, if Washington can hang in the game, I can give themselves a chance late. I think they have a real chance of winning today. So I got the Commanders over the Bills.
I like that. I like that pick a lot. The enemy he's not a defensive coordinator, but whenever he was over in
Yes.
Kansas City, it's been a long day. Whenever he was over in Kansas City, he's pretty much had Josh Allen's number.
Yeah.
Like, knows how to dial up something that's gonna put points on the board, and that's whenever Josh Allen's gonna start feeling like he has to do too much,
Right.
and he's gonna keep up the pressure on that offense. And
Yeah,
so
I think the way to have success against the Bills is to make Josh Allen feel like he has to be Superman. And I think Washington has the kind of team that's sneaky good and good on defense, and I think they have the kind of team that can pull an upset on a team like the Bills, who's not, I don't want to say emotionally fragile team because that may be overstating a little bit, but they are prone to some ups and downs. And we've seen that, throughout Josh Allen's career, basically, that he's a very up and down player. And it's like the fact that he was so good last week, he's one of those guys where it's like, okay, he had a great week in week 2. So in week 3, it could go back the other way like that, So I think the Bills may be in some trouble today on the road. Who's your upset pick?
my upset pick is Packers versus the Saints. I can't for the life of me figure out why people don't think that Jordan Love is good and why the Packers are supposed to be bad. Like, I,
Yeah,
what
when you before the show, just let people behind the curtain a little bit. Alex was like, "I got the Packers." I was like, "I thought you were picking the Packers to lose today." I was like, "Huh, that's it's like." And then I read the line wrong. I was like, "Wait, they're an underdog against this. Why are they an underdog today?" I think that's a great pick. I think the Packers may win by 6 points. And I was high on the Packers last week. They ended up losing. I still think that was the right side of the game. They looked like the better team to me. I think they come back and win today too.
Yeah, no, they're gonna get after Derek Carr. I don't really believe in this Saints defense. Everybody does. Just in the NFC South, like, I would rather have the Tampa Bay defense playing or even Atlanta. Like, we've seen Atlanta stop them. I think the Packers can be sneakily high powered. I
Yeah.
think enough is Watson coming back today. Christian Watson coming back today.
I don't think he's playing today. It was
Oh,
questionable. Let me see if they came out with that yet. Actually, we'll check that in real time.
well, he checks that out. Yeah, no, I think that they've got enough weapons to put up a lot of points.
He's
Not
out. He's out
now,
today. Yeah,
well, they still got so many other
they got
players.
they got other options. Dobbs is on borderline going to be a number 1 in his career, if not a really overqualified number 2. I think it looks like, and I still think they have enough to win that game. I had some
Yeah,
honorary mentions for you. I think
let's.
I think the Bucks have a chance to beat the Eagles. I really do. I don't think the Eagles have looked particularly well. The Bucks may come down to earth any week now, but I think Baker's playing really well, and I think that roster is still really, really, really good. So I think the Bucks have a shot. I think the Colts have a shot to beat the Ravens with Gardner Minshew, and sometimes these backups come in, and Gardner Minshew is the kind of guy who can do this, where they come in and light it up for a week. Now you wouldn't want to lean on them for 4 weeks, but like sometimes they come in for one game, light it up, and then I actually think the Titans have a chance against the Browns to go in and beat them.
I
And
think I think Vrabel's a different class of coach from Stefanski, and
I do too. And that was a coaching mismatch to me where I like the Titans in that spot. And I think coming off the Chubb injury with Deshaun not playing well and the Titans coming off a big win against the Chargers, I think they have a real shot to continue that momentum and go ahead and, like I said, beat the Browns today. And so honorary mentions. There you go.
for the last little bit, Jonathan Taylor, week 5, he's supposed to come back. So that's a couple weeks away. He's wanting a new contract. The Colts came down from their first round pick to or a couple of second round picks, or like a second and 2/3 or something. They came down off of that asking price a little bit, but it's still a little bit, I don't know. What do you think? Where do you think he plays? Where should he play? Where do you think he ends up playing?
You go first. Where do you want to see him play?
I want to see him go to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers.
That's what I was literally gonna say. Oh my gosh. I want to see him in Tampa, man. I think you put Jonathan Taylor, another weapon for Baker Mayfield, in that offense. I think that's someone who can catch the ball out of the backfield, obviously an elite level runner. I think you put him with Baker, who's having a good season. That defense is really good still. Mike Evans on the edge. I think that's a playoff team. If they're not already, I think that's a team that could win the division and maybe win a home playoff game if they brought in Jonathan Taylor. So I was thinking, I really was wondering if that's what you were going to say too. I know a lot of people think he should stay with the Colts, and they would have quite the running game with Jonathan Taylor and Anthony Richardson both in the backfield. But yeah, I think it'd be fun to see him go to Tampa, man. I really do.
Well, the thing with it is, I think that he would have to. I think that's why we want to see two more games with Baker Mayfield. See if Rachaad White can open up.
Right.
Expecting him to, after being the backup behind Fournette. But I think if it comes down where it's like, no, 4-0, they're going into their bye 5, and they're saying it's not looking like we're going to have to draft a quarterback.
Right.
We could give up whatever pick. And
you probably wouldn't have to give out a first round, like you said, anymore, And yeah, I totally agree. You wait a couple more weeks because you want to make sure you're going to be good and in playoff contention. You don't want to go, if they lost the next 2 and looked really bad, you wouldn't make that trade. But what if they beat the Eagles today? Like I said, I think there's a chance of that happening. If you beat the Eagles, all of a sudden you're thinking, okay, let's go for it. Let's see if Baker can kind of revive his career, be our franchise guy for a couple of years. We'll go get Jonathan Taylor. We'll take almost the San Francisco approach, which is we're going to have a cheap quarterback and just load up the rest of the roster. And I think it could be you have to see what it looks like for a couple more weeks, because anybody can look good for a couple weeks in the NFL. It's like there's enough talent. Almost anyone can look good. But if they sustain the success for a little bit more and it looks like they're really going to make a run, I'd love to see it.
Oh, man. And I think Baker would take a team-friendly deal because there's with Mike Evans, Godwin's going to come up, Wirfs is going to come up, and Wirfs is playing left tackle now, and so he's going to be getting more money. So they have really good pieces. What they need is a run game, and I think everybody was nervous about the offensive line, but I think what we're starting to see is a lot more gel happening with that offensive line.
I think they look pretty good, man. I think they do. It's like they look better than I thought. I really thought they might be in the Caleb Williams business, and they are going to maybe make the playoffs, and I kind of started changing that opinion. You talked me into it a little bit before the season, and they look good to me, and so we'll have to see how it plays out. I'm excited for the games today, and I think I think both of us gotta get going. So everyone, thank you again for listening. This was episode 4. We will see everybody next week. Enjoy week 3 of the NFL. There's some great games today. Good job today, Alex. And I will see everybody later on. Bye.